The sound of gunfire ricocheted through the air as Owen Wade raced across the open plain, his horse's hooves pounding against the hard, packed dirt. Blood soaked his sleeve where a bullet had grazed him, but he couldn't afford to slow down, not with 3 men from the Blackburn gang still on his tail. The year was 1878, and in the untamed territories of Wyoming, a man's life could end as quickly as the snap of a trigger. Owen had been trailing cattle north from Cheyenne when he spotted the smoke. A distant farmhouse engulfed in flames, the telltale sign of another Blackburn raid. He'd arrived too late to save the homesteaders, but just in time to witness the gang finishing their grisly work. They'd spotted him watching from the ridge, and the chase had begun. Now, as the sun began to set over the western horizon, Owen spotted Salvation, the outskirts of Valentine, Wyoming. The small cattle town wasn't much, but it offered sanctuary from the open country where the Blackburns had the advantage. He spurred his chestnut stallion, Rusty, toward a cluster of buildings that marked the edge of town. "Come on, boy," Owen urged, patting Rusty's sweat-slicked neck. Just a little further. The thundering hoofbeats behind him had faded, but Owen knew better than to slow down. The Blackburns were notorious for their persistence. He guided Rusty toward a large barn on the eastern edge of Valentine, hoping to find temporary shelter and perhaps someone who could help tend his wound. As he approached, Owen slowed Rusty to a walk. The barn looked abandoned, its weathered wood gray against the darkening sky. Perfect for laying low. He dismounted, wincing as pain shot through his left arm. The bullet graze wasn't deep, but it stung like fire. Leading Rusty around to the back of the barn, Owen froze. There, huddled against the weather-beaten boards, was a woman. Her dress was torn and dirty, her dark hair falling in tangled waves around her face. She looked up at his approach, and Owen saw terror flash in her eyes, deep brown eyes that widened at the sight of him. She pressed herself further against the barn, trembling like an aspen leaf in autumn. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "please don't hurt me." Owen raised his uninjured hand slowly. "You're safe here," he said softly. "No one's coming." The woman didn't look convinced. Her gaze darted past him, scanning the horizon. "My name's Owen Wade," he continued, keeping his distance. "I'm not going to harm you, madam." She swallowed hard, her throat working. "They'll find me," she said. "They always do." "Who will find you?" Owen asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. "The Blackburns," she replied, confirming his suspicion. "I escaped this morning, been running ever since." Owen glanced back at the open country behind them. "I've got 3 of them on my tail as well. We need to get inside. Can you walk?" The woman nodded, though uncertainty clouded her features. She attempted to stand but stumbled. Owen moved forward, offering his good arm for support. She hesitated before accepting it. "I'm Theresa," she said quietly. "Theresa Mitchell." "Miss Mitchell," Owen acknowledged with a slight nod. "Let's get you somewhere safe." He helped her to her feet, noting how she winced with each step. Her ankle appeared swollen beneath the hem of her mudded dress. "Sprained it," she explained, following his gaze. "Fell in a gully about 2 miles back." Owen led Rusty with one hand while supporting Theresa with the other. They made their way to the barn door, which hung partially open on rusted hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the sweet smell of old hay. Shafts of fading sunlight filtered through cracks in the walls, illuminating dancing motes in the still air. "It's not much," Owen said, helping Theresa settle onto a pile of hay, "but it'll hide us for now." He closed the barn door as best he could, then tied Rusty to a post near a water trough that, miraculously, still contained some water. The horse drank greedily while Owen gathered his saddlebags. "You're bleeding," Theresa observed, pointing to his arm. Owen glanced down. Just a graze. I've had worse. Let me look at it, she insisted, straightening slightly. It's the least I can do. Owen hesitated, then sat beside her on the hay. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the bloody gash. Theresa examined it with surprising efficiency, her touch gentle despite her trembling hands. It needs cleaning, she said. Do you have any water? Whiskey would be better. Owen reached into his saddlebag and produced a small flask. Lucky for us, I never ride without it. A ghost of a smile touched Theresa's lips as she took the flask. This will sting. She was right. Owen clenched his jaw as she poured the whiskey over his wound, but he didn't make a sound. Theresa tore a strip from her petticoat already in tatters and wrapped it around his arm with practiced ease. You've done this before, Owen observed. Theresa's eyes darkened. My father was a doctor in St. Louis. I helped in his practice before. She trailed off, her gaze dropping to her hands. Owen didn't press. Everyone in the West had a story, and most weren't happy ones. Instead, he offered her the flask. Medicinal purposes, he said with a slight smile. Theresa accepted it, taking a small sip that nonetheless made her cough. She handed it back quickly. Thank you, she said. For helping me. Most men wouldn't have stopped. Most men aren't being chased by the Blackburns, Owen replied wryly. What did you do to earn their ire? Witnessed them burning out a homestead about 15 miles east of here. Family named Peterson, I think. They didn't leave any survivors. Theresa closed her eyes, pain etching lines around her mouth. They never do. How did you come to be with them? Owen asked carefully. Theresa was silent for so long that Owen thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice flat. They raided the stagecoach I was on, traveling from Cheyenne to visit my aunt in Valentine. Killed everyone else. Their leader, Cole Blackburn, decided to keep me. Her hands twisted in her lap. That was 3 weeks ago. Owen felt cold fury rise within him. The Blackburn gang's reputation for brutality was well known throughout the territory, but their crimes against women were particularly heinous. I'm sorry, he said, the words feeling woefully inadequate. Theresa looked up, a spark of defiance in her eyes. I got away. That's what matters now. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the barn walls. Night was falling fast, bringing with it a chill that seeped through their clothing. Owen shrugged off his coat and offered it to Theresa. You need it more than I do, he said when she tried to refuse. What about you? She asked, even as she pulled the worn leather around her shoulders. I've got plenty of insulation, he replied with a pat to his chest. It wasn't entirely true at 31. Owen was lean and weathered from years on the trail, but the grateful look in Theresa's eyes was worth the small lie. We should rest while we can, Owen suggested. Come morning, we'll need to move. Valentine proper is only about 2 miles from here. We can find help there. The sheriff? Theresa asked hopefully. Owen grimaced. Sheriff Claiborne isn't known for his bravery when it comes to the Blackburns, but there are good people in town who will help us. Theresa nodded, though uncertainty shadowed her features. You think they followed us here? Hard to say. I lost sight of them about 5 miles back, but they're persistent bastards, he caught himself. Pardon my language, madam. A tired smile touched Theresa's lips. After what I've been through, Mr. Wade, rough language is the least of my concerns. Owen retrieved a blanket from his saddlebags and handed it to her. Try to get some sleep. I'll keep watch. You need rest too, Theresa protested. Your wound will heal just fine, Owen finished. I'm used to long nights, Miss Mitchell. Theresa looked like she wanted to argue further, but exhaustion won out. She arranged the blanket over herself, using Owen's coat as a pillow. Thank you, she murmured, her eyes already closing, for saying I'm safe. Owen watched as her breathing evened out into sleep, her face softening in repose. She was young, perhaps 25, with delicate features that spoke of gentler upbringing than most women in the territory. What had brought her west? A question for another time, perhaps. The night deepened around them. Owen kept vigil, his Spencer rifle across his knees, listening to the sounds of the prairie night. Coyotes yipped in the distance, and the wind continued its mournful song through the eaves of the old barn. He thought about the Blackburns. Their gang had been terrorizing eastern Wyoming for nearly 2 years now. Cole Blackburn, the leader, was rumored to be a former Confederate officer who turned to outlawry rather than surrender. His younger brothers, Jed and Marcus, were equally ruthless, and they'd gathered a band of about 10 men, all killers with prices on their heads. The territorial governor had posted a substantial bounty for their capture, but no lawman had managed to bring them in. Some, like Sheriff Claiborne, avoided confrontation altogether. Others had tried and ended up dead for their troubles. Owen had no illusion about his chances against the entire gang. His plan was simple: get Theresa to Valentine, find his friend Thomas at the livery, and arrange safe passage for her to Cheyenne or beyond. Once she was safe, he'd consider his options regarding the Blackburns. He was no bounty hunter, just a cowhand who'd spent the last decade driving cattle up from Texas. But he'd seen too much cruelty in his time to walk away from someone in need. Especially someone like Theresa, who'd endured horrors he could scarcely imagine and still maintained the strength to escape. Around midnight, Owen heard hoofbeats in the distance. He stiffened, his hand tightening on his rifle. The sounds grew closer, then veered away toward the town. Not searching for them, then at least not yet. But it confirmed his suspicion that the Blackburns had followed him to Valentine. Theresa stirred in her sleep, a small whimper escaping her lips. Owen wondered what nightmares haunted her. He resisted the urge to wake her. Sleep was the best medicine for now. Dawn arrived with pale fingers of light creeping through the barn walls. Owen had dozed intermittently, but snapped fully awake as Rusty whickered softly. He stood, stretching his stiff muscles, and peered through a crack in the wall. The landscape appeared empty, bathed in the golden light of early morning. Behind him, he heard Theresa stir. "Good morning," she said, her voice rough with sleep. She sat up, pushing tangled hair from her face. Despite the dirt and exhaustion, there was a quiet dignity about her that Owen admired. "Morning," he replied. "How's the ankle?" Theresa gingerly flexed her foot. "Better, I think. Still sore, but I can walk on it." "Good, because we should move soon. I heard riders last night." Fear flickered across Theresa's face, but she nodded resolutely. "What's the plan?" "We'll head into Valentine," Owen explained, gathering his belongings. "I've got a friend at the livery stable, Thomas Bennett. He's a good man, trustworthy. He'll help us find somewhere safe for you to stay while we figure out our next move. And if the Blackburns are already in town," Owen checked his revolver before holstering it, "then we'll be very, very careful." They shared a meager breakfast of jerky and hardtack from Owen's saddlebags. Theresa ate slowly, as if unused to food. It made Owen wonder how she'd been treated during her captivity, but he didn't ask. Some wounds were too fresh to probe. "Were you raised in Wyoming?" Theresa asked, breaking the silence. Owen shook his head. "Texas originally. My father had a small ranch outside San Antonio. After the war, things got complicated. I've been working cattle drives ever since." "Family, none living," Owen replied, his tone making it clear he didn't wish to elaborate. "What about you? You mentioned St. Louis." Theresa nodded. "My father's practice was there. After he passed 2 years ago, I moved to Cheyenne to live with my sister Elizabeth. She's married to a banker there." Her expression softened. "They have a little boy, James. He's 4 and absolutely convinced he's going to be a train conductor when he grows up." Owen smiled at that. Sounds like a fine ambition. My Aunt Martha, my father's sister, lives here in Valentine. She's been ill. That's why I was traveling to see her when. Theresa trailed off, her eyes clouding. We'll find her, Owen promised. Make sure she knows you're safe. Gratitude shone in Theresa's eyes. Why are you helping me, Mr. Wade? You don't know me. You're risking your life. Owen considered the question. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. And out here, that's reason enough. They prepared to leave, Owen saddling Rusty while Theresa attempted to make herself presentable. She used a little water from the trough to wash her face and hands and rebraided her long, dark hair. I must look a fright, she said self-consciously, smoothing her torn dress. You look like a survivor, Owen replied honestly. A flush colored Theresa's cheeks, but she held his gaze. Thank you. Owen helped her onto Rusty, then climbed up behind her. The arrangement was intimate by necessity, but Owen was careful to maintain as much propriety as circumstances allowed. Theresa's back was rigid against his chest at first, but as they began their slow journey toward town, she gradually relaxed. Valentine was stirring to life as they approached. The main street ran east to west, lined with the typical businesses of a cattle town: saloons, a general store, a small hotel, and various other establishments catering to cowboys and travelers. At the eastern end stood the livery stable, their destination. Owen kept to the outskirts, approaching from behind the buildings rather than riding openly down the main street. He scanned every alleyway and doorway, alert for any sign of the Blackburns. The livery stable was a large wooden structure with a corral attached. As they approached the back entrance, a stocky man with graying hair emerged, pitchfork in hand. He squinted at them, then broke into a grin of recognition. Owen Wade, you old son of a gun, he called, though his smile faltered as he took in their appearance. What in tarnation happened to you? Trouble, Thomas, Owen replied, dismounting and helping Theresa down. The kind that follows with guns. Thomas Bennett's expression grew serious. Blackburns? He asked in a lower voice. Owen nodded. This is Miss Theresa Mitchell. She needs help, and so do I. Thomas's gaze softened as he looked at Theresa. Madam, he said with a respectful nod, let's get you both inside before anyone sees you. He led them through the stable to a small living area at the back. The room was sparse but clean, with a cookstove, a table with chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. Sit, Thomas insisted, gesturing to the chairs. You look dead on your feet. Theresa sank gratefully into a seat while Owen briefly explained their situation. Thomas listened without interruption, his weathered face growing grimmer by the minute. Cole Blackburn and 2 others rode into town last night, he confirmed when Owen finished. Asking questions at the saloon, showing your description, Owen. Said you shot one of their men and they were bringing you to justice. Thomas snorted. As if those animals know anything about justice. They're still in town, Owen asked. Left early this morning, heading east, but I'd bet my last dollar they've got men watching the roads. I need to get Miss Mitchell somewhere safe, Owen said. Her aunt lives in town, Martha. Mitchell, Theresa supplied. Martha Mitchell. She lives on Pine Street, I believe. Thomas frowned. Martha Mitchell passed on about a month ago, miss. Pneumonia took her quick. I'm sorry. Theresa's face crumpled, though no tears fell. I see, she said quietly. Owen placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry, Theresa. She nodded, swallowing hard. At least she didn't suffer long, she whispered, more to herself than to them. Thomas cleared his throat. Miss Mitchell can stay with my sister, Emma. She runs the millinery shop on Main Street and lives above it. She's a widow, very respectable, and can be trusted completely. That's very kind, Theresa began, but I wouldn't want to impose. Nonsense, Thomas interrupted. Emma would be delighted for the company, and it's the safest place for you right now." Owen nodded his agreement. "It would be temporary, just until we can arrange for your return to Cheyenne." Theresa looked between the two men, then nodded reluctantly. "Thank you. What about you?" Thomas asked Owen. "The Blackburns won't give up easily." "I know," Owen replied grimly, "but I can't leave town while they're hunting for Theresa. They've already killed too many innocent people." "You're thinking of facing them?" Thomas looked incredulous. "That's suicide, Owen." "Not facing them directly, but maybe we can get word to the marshal in Cheyenne. Unlike our local sheriff, Marshal Calloway isn't afraid of the Blackburns." Thomas considered this. "Telegraph office is being watched." "I tried sending a wire yesterday when I first saw them in town, but one of their men was loitering right outside." "Then we'll need another way," Owen said. "Is Caleb Miller still running the mail coach twice a week? Next one leaves tomorrow morning." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "That might work. We could get a message out with him." "And in the meantime?" Theresa asked, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "In the meantime," Owen said, "we stay hidden, stay alert, and pray the Blackburns don't burn Valentine to the ground looking for us." Thomas moved to the stove, stoking the fire and putting on a kettle. "You both need food and rest. I'll go speak to Emma after breakfast, arrange things. Then we can move Miss Mitchell after dark." "I need to check on my horse," Owen said, standing. "I'll tend to him," Thomas insisted. "You stay out of sight. Half the town might have seen your description by now." Owen reluctantly agreed, sinking back into his chair. As Thomas busied himself preparing a simple meal of bacon and eggs, Theresa leaned closer to Owen. "This is too dangerous for you," she said quietly. "These people are helping me because of you, but you could ride out now, get away safely." Owen studied her face, the determination in her eyes, the stubborn set of her chin. "Is that what you want, for me to leave?" "I want you to be safe," she replied. "You've already done more than anyone could expect." "I don't abandon people who need help," Owen said simply. "And I particularly don't abandon women to men like Cole Blackburn." Something shifted in Theresa's gaze, a recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas returned with plates of food, and they ate in relative silence. The hot meal revived them both, though exhaustion still lined Theresa's face. After they finished, Thomas insisted she take his bed to rest while he and Owen planned their next moves. Once Theresa was settled, the two men spoke in low voices at the table. "The woman's been through hell," Thomas observed, glancing toward the sleeping area. Owen nodded grimly. 3 weeks with the Blackburns. I don't know how she survived it." "Some women have a strength that would put most men to shame," Thomas replied. "My Emma was like that after she lost her husband. Thought it would break her, but she just got stronger." Owen knew Thomas's sister had been widowed young when her husband was killed in a mining accident. She'd built a life for herself afterward, turning a talent for millinery into a successful business. "Emma will look after her," Thomas continued. "But what's your plan, Owen? Really?" Owen sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Honestly, I don't know yet. Getting Theresa safely to Cheyenne is the priority. After that," he shrugged, "the Blackburns need to be stopped. Too many people have suffered because of them." "You're not a lawman," Thomas pointed out. "It's not your fight." "It became my fight when I found her behind that barn," Owen replied, his voice hardening. "And when I saw what they did to the Peterson family, some things a man can't just walk away from." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand that. Just don't get yourself killed over it." "I'll try my best not to," Owen said with a wry smile. Throughout the day, Thomas made discreet inquiries around town while Owen stayed hidden with Theresa. He returned mid-afternoon with news that Cole Blackburn and his brothers had indeed left Valentine, but two of their men remained behind, one watching the livery and another the roads out of town. "Emma's prepared a room for Miss Mitchell," Thomas reported. "We can move her after dark." The back entrance to the shop is unobserved. As evening approached, Theresa awoke from her rest looking somewhat restored. Thomas provided a dress belonging to his niece for her to change into, as her own was beyond salvaging. The simple blue calico was a touch large but clean and whole, and Theresa's relief at the fresh clothing was evident. "You look much improved," Owen observed when she emerged from behind the screen Thomas had set up for privacy. A faint blush colored Theresa's cheeks. "Amazing what clean clothing can do for one's spirits," she replied. She'd washed and rebraided her hair as well, and in the lamplight, Owen could see how truly beautiful she was beneath the fear and exhaustion. Thomas prepared a light supper, and they ate while finalizing their plan. After dark, Thomas would create a diversion at the front of the livery, while Owen escorted Theresa through the alleys to Emma's shop on Main Street. "Once you're settled with Emma, I'll arrange for a message to reach Marshal Calloway in Cheyenne," Owen explained to Theresa. "With luck, he could be here within 3 days. And until then," she asked. "Until then, you stay hidden," Owen said firmly. "Emma's shop is the last place they'd look for you." Night fell, and Thomas left to set their plan in motion. Owen and Theresa waited in tense silence until they heard the commotion from the front of the livery, Thomas loudly berating a drunken cowboy, actually his nephew, in on the plan, for disturbing his horses. "That's our cue," Owen whispered, taking Theresa's hand. "Stay close and move quickly." They slipped out the back door and into the darkness. Owen led the way, moving from shadow to shadow, pausing at each corner to check for danger. Theresa kept pace despite her injured ankle, her hand gripping his tightly. Main Street was busy with evening traffic, cowboys and townsfolk moving between saloons, the hotel, and other establishments. The noise and bustle provided good cover as Owen and Theresa darted across an alley and reached the back entrance to Emma's millinery. The door opened before they could knock, revealing a slender woman in her 40s with kind eyes and Thomas's determined chin. "Quickly," Emma Bennett whispered, ushering them inside. "Upstairs, second door on the right." She led them through the darkened shop and up a narrow staircase to a cozy apartment. The second bedroom was small but comfortable, with a single bed, a washstand, and a small chest of drawers. "It's not much," Emma said apologetically to Theresa, "but you'll be safe here." "It's wonderful," Theresa replied sincerely. "I can't thank you enough for taking such a risk." Emma waved away her thanks. "Any decent person would do the same. Now let me show you where everything is. Mr. Wade, make yourself comfortable in the parlor. I've put coffee on." As Emma showed Theresa around the apartment, Owen sank into a chair in the small parlor, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. The events of the past day and night had taken their toll, and his wounded arm throbbed dully. Emma returned a few minutes later with coffee and a knowing look. "You look half dead, Mr. Wade," she observed, handing him a steaming cup. "When was the last time you slept properly?" "Before I met Cole Blackburn, I reckon," Owen replied with a tired smile. Emma studied him thoughtfully. "She's a remarkable woman," she said, nodding toward the bedroom where Theresa was settling in. "Thomas told me a little of what happened. Most wouldn't have survived such an ordeal." "No," Owen agreed. "They wouldn't. And you're planning to bring the Blackburns to justice?" Owen sipped his coffee. "I'm planning to try." Emma nodded as if she'd expected nothing less. "Well, you're welcome to use my sofa tonight. It's not the most comfortable bed, but it's better than riding out there with Blackburn's men watching the roads." "I appreciate that," Owen said. "But I should return to the livery, help Thomas keep watch." "Thomas can manage," Emma insisted. "And you're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. The woman in there is depending on you, Mr. Wade. Rest while you can." Put that way, Owen couldn't argue. He agreed to stay the night, and Emma brought him blankets for the sofa. Before retiring to her own room, she checked on Theresa one last time. "She's already asleep," Emma reported softly. "Poor thing was dead on her feet." Owen nodded, grateful that Theresa could find some peace, however temporary. "Thank you, Miss Bennet, for everything." Emma smiled. "Call me Emma, please, and you're welcome. Now get some rest." Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded Owen for some time. He lay on the sofa, listening to the sounds of the town through the partially open window, piano music from the saloon down the street, occasional laughter, the clip-clop of horses. Somewhere out there, Blackburn's men were watching, waiting for any sign of him or Theresa. Finally, fatigue overcame vigilance, and Owen drifted into an uneasy sleep. He woke with a start some hours later, hand automatically reaching for his revolver. It took him a moment to recognize where he was, and another to identify what had awakened him: soft footsteps across the wooden floor. "It's just me," Theresa's voice came quietly from the darkness. Owen sat up, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. She stood in the doorway of her borrowed bedroom, wrapped in a shawl over her nightgown. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, dark waves against the white fabric. "Everything all right?" he asked, keeping his voice low to avoid disturbing Emma. Theresa moved closer, perching on the edge of a chair near the sofa. "I couldn't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see them, hear them." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I keep thinking they'll find me again." "They won't," Owen promised, though he knew it wasn't entirely in his power to guarantee. Theresa looked at him, her eyes reflecting the faint moonlight from the window. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I won't let them," he said simply. Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly. "I believe you," she whispered. Then, after a pause, "Tell me something about yourself, Owen, something from before." Owen understood her need for distraction, for conversation that had nothing to do with their current danger. He thought for a moment. "I used to dream of having my own ranch," he said finally. "Nothing grand, just a piece of land, some good grazing, maybe a stream running through it. Somewhere in Wyoming or Montana, where the winters are hard but the summers make up for it." "Why didn't you pursue that dream?" Theresa asked. Owen shrugged. "Never seemed to have enough money saved, and after a while the trail becomes its own kind of home. Always moving, always seeing new country," he smiled faintly. "But lately I've been thinking about it again, getting too old for endless cattle drives." "You're hardly old," Theresa observed. 31 feels ancient some mornings," Owen replied with a soft laugh. "Especially after sleeping on the ground for weeks at a stretch." Theresa smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, lighting her eyes and revealing a dimple in her right cheek. "What about you?" Owen asked. "What were your dreams before?" Her smile faded slightly. "I wanted to be a doctor like my father. He even encouraged it, unusual for a man of his generation. I studied his medical books, assisted him with patients." She sighed. "But after he died, there was no money for medical school, and my brother-in-law thought it an unsuitable ambition for a respectable young lady." "So you settled for being a respectable young lady instead?" A flash of the earlier defiance returned to Theresa's eyes. "I settled for survival, Mr. Wade, as women often must." Owen nodded, chastened. "I'm sorry, that was unfair." "But not entirely inaccurate," she conceded with a rueful smile. "I did hope that someday circumstances might change, that perhaps I could save enough to pursue my studies." She looked down at her hands. Then the stagecoach was attacked, and suddenly survival meant something much more immediate. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the darkness making it easier to share confidences. "What will you do?" Owen asked eventually. "After we get you safely to Cheyenne." Theresa considered the question. "I'm not sure I can stay there," she admitted. "Everyone will know what happened to me. In a town like Cheyenne, that kind of story spreads. People will look at me differently, talk behind their hands." She straightened her shoulders. "Perhaps I'll go further west, California maybe, start fresh where no one knows me." "Running away?" Owen asked gently. "Moving forward," Theresa corrected. "There's a difference." Owen couldn't argue with that. "Well, wherever you decide to go, I hope you find a way to pursue that medical career. The West needs good doctors." "Thank you," she said softly. Then, after another pause, "I should try to sleep again. Dawn will be here soon enough." She stood, and Owen found himself wishing she would stay longer. There was something about Theresa Mitchell that drew him, her courage, her resilience, the quiet dignity with which she faced her circumstances. "Good night, Owen," she said, moving toward her room. "Good night, Theresa," he replied. "And for what it's worth, I think you'll make an excellent doctor someday." She paused in the doorway, looking back at him with a smile that warmed him more than any fire could. Then she was gone, leaving Owen to ponder when exactly she had become more to him than just someone to protect. Morning arrived with the sound of Emma moving about the kitchen, preparing breakfast. Owen rose, folded the blankets, and splashed water on his face from the basin Emma had thoughtfully left out. His reflection in the small mirror showed several days' worth of stubble and tired eyes, but he felt more rested than he had in days. Theresa emerged from her room a short time later, dressed again in the borrowed blue calico. Emma had loaned her a brush, and her dark hair was neatly arranged in a simple style that suited her. "Good morning," she said, with a shy smile that suggested she was remembering their nighttime conversation. "Morning," Owen replied, suddenly aware of how disheveled he must look compared to her neat appearance. "Did you sleep better?" "Yes, thank you." She didn't elaborate, but the shadows under her eyes had lightened somewhat. Emma served a hearty breakfast of flapjacks, bacon, and coffee. As they ate, she updated them on the town's situation. "Thomas came by the back way just before dawn," she reported. "Cole Blackburn and his brothers returned to Valentine late last night. They're staying at the hotel, but their men are all over town. Word is they're offering a reward for information about either of you." Owen frowned. "That complicates things. I need to get a message to Cheyenne today." "Thomas is handling it," Emma assured him. "His nephew Danny is riding out with the mail coach this morning. He'll carry a letter to Marshal Calloway explaining the situation." "That's good," Owen said, relief evident in his voice. "But it still leaves us with 3 days to keep Theresa safe and avoid getting caught ourselves." Emma poured more coffee. "You're welcome to stay here as long as needed. The shop provides good cover, women come and go all day, and no one pays much attention to a millinery." "Won't your customers notice a man hiding upstairs?" Theresa asked. "Not if he stays away from the windows and keeps quiet during business hours," Emma replied with a meaningful look at Owen. Owen nodded his agreement. "I'll be like a mouse," Emma snorted, "a very large armed mouse." She stood, gathering the breakfast dishes. "I need to open the shop soon. You two make yourselves comfortable, but remember no going near the front windows and keep your voices down when customers are present." After Emma went downstairs to prepare for the day's business, Owen and Theresa were left alone in the apartment. An awkward silence fell between them, different from the easy conversation of the night before. "I feel useless, hiding up here," Theresa said finally, moving to help wash the breakfast dishes. Owen understood the feeling. "It won't be for long. Once Marshal Calloway arrives with his deputies, the Blackburns will be dealt with." And if they find us before then? Theresa's hands stilled in the dishwater, her knuckles whitening. Owen moved to stand beside her, gently taking a plate from her grip before she could break it. "Then I'll handle it," he said firmly. "But they won't find us. Emma's shop is the perfect hiding place." Theresa didn't look convinced, but she nodded and resumed washing the dishes. Owen dried them, and they worked together in silence for a few minutes. "Tell me about your family," Owen said, hoping to distract her from her fears. "You mentioned a sister in Cheyenne." The tactic worked. Theresa's expression softened as she spoke of Elizabeth, her older sister by 3 years, and Elizabeth's husband George, the banker. "And little James, of course," she added, a genuine smile lighting her features. "He's the most curious child, questions about everything. Drives George to distraction sometimes, but Elizabeth encourages it." "He sounds like a fine boy," Owen said. "You must miss them." "Terribly," Theresa admitted. "Elizabeth must be frantic with worry by now. The stage was due in Valentine weeks ago." "We'll get word to her soon," Owen promised. "Let her know you're safe." Theresa nodded, blinking rapidly. "Thank you." The day passed slowly. They could hear the murmur of voices from the shop below as customers came and went, and occasionally Emma's laugh or comment about a particular hat. Around noon, Emma brought up sandwiches and whispered news that Thomas had confirmed the message was on its way to Cheyenne. By late afternoon, Owen was restless from confinement. He paced the small apartment, careful to stay away from windows as promised. Theresa sat in a chair by the unlit fireplace, mending a tear in Emma's shawl with neat, precise stitches. "You'd make a good surgeon with those hands," Owen observed, pausing in his pacing. Theresa looked up, surprised. "That's what my father used to say. He claimed I had better stitching technique than most medical students he'd taught." "Why did he encourage you to pursue medicine when most fathers wouldn't?" A fond smile touched Theresa's lips. "My mother died when I was young, childbed fever after my younger brother was born. The baby died too. Father said medicine needed more women doctors, especially for women's conditions. He believed female patients would often be more comfortable with a woman doctor." "He sounds like a forward-thinking man." "He was," Theresa agreed, "ahead of his time in many ways." She set down her mending with a sigh. "I miss him terribly sometimes." Owen understood loss all too well. "My parents died in a fever epidemic when I was 16, he said quietly. "My older brother took over the ranch, but he was killed at Shiloh in '62. "I'm sorry," Theresa said, her eyes soft with genuine sympathy. Owen shrugged, uncomfortable with the old grief her words stirred. "It was a long time ago. Some wounds never fully heal," she observed. "We just learn to live with them." Owen's response was interrupted by the sound of heavy boots on the stairs, too heavy to be Emma's. They both froze, Owen's hand moving instinctively to his revolver. The door opened to reveal Thomas, his normally ruddy face pale with worry. "What's happened?" Owen demanded. Thomas closed the door behind him, speaking in a low, urgent voice. "They've started searching buildings. Blackburn's convinced you're still in town, and he's getting desperate. They've already been through the livery, the hotel, and most of the businesses on the west end of Main Street. They'll reach the millinery soon," Owen concluded grimly. Thomas nodded. "By tomorrow morning, I'd guess, maybe sooner." Theresa had gone very still, her face drained of color. "What do we do?" Owen thought quickly. "We need to move you somewhere they've already searched. Thomas, did they do a thorough job at the livery?" "Not particularly," Thomas admitted. "Seemed more interested in intimidating than actually finding anything. Didn't check the hayloft or the feed room." "Then that's where we go," Owen decided. "After dark, we'll move Theresa back to the livery. They won't search it twice." "It's risky," Thomas warned. "They've got men watching the streets." "Less risky than staying here and being found for certain," Owen countered. Theresa stood, her chin lifted with determination despite the fear in her eyes. I agree with Owen. We should move tonight. Thomas looked between them, then nodded reluctantly. I'll come back after the shop closes. Emma can create a distraction while we slip out the back. After Thomas left, Theresa began gathering her few belongings: the borrowed dress, a shawl Emma had loaned her, a comb for her hair. You don't have to do this, Owen said, watching her methodical preparations. You could stay with Emma, claim you're a customer who got caught up in this unwillingly. Theresa paused, turning to face him with surprising intensity. I will not lie to save my skin while putting others at risk, she said firmly. Besides, do you really think Cole Blackburn would believe such a story or care if it were true? Owen had to concede her point. No, he admitted. He wouldn't. Then we stick together, Theresa said, returning to her packing. As we have been, her courage continued to impress Owen. Most women, most people would have broken under the strain of what she'd endured. Yet here she stood, ready to face further danger rather than compromise her principles or endanger others. Emma closed the shop at sunset and came upstairs to help with preparations for their move. She packed food for them to take and insisted on giving Theresa a warmer shawl for the cool nights. It gets cold in that livery, she explained, wrapping the woolen garment around Theresa's shoulders. Thomas keeps complaining about fixing the drafts, but never gets around to it. Thomas arrived as full darkness fell, bringing news that the Blackburns had retired to the saloon for the evening but had men posted at both ends of Main Street. We'll need to be quick and quiet, he warned. Stay in the shadows, and if anyone calls out, run. Don't try to talk your way out of it. Their plan was simple. Emma would accidentally knock over a display on the boardwalk in front of her shop, creating a commotion that would draw attention from the back alley. Meanwhile, Owen, Theresa, and Thomas would slip out the rear door and make their way to the livery through the network of alleys behind the buildings. As they prepared to leave, Emma embraced Theresa warmly. You take care, she said, and when this is all over, you come back and visit me properly. I will, Theresa promised, returning the embrace. Thank you for everything. Emma turned to Owen next. You look after her, she said sternly, and yourself too. Yes, madam, Owen replied with a small smile. The night was cloudy, providing additional cover as they slipped out the back door of the millinery. From the front of the shop came the sound of breaking glass, and Emma's exaggerated exclamations of dismay, the promised distraction. Thomas led the way, moving with surprising stealth for a man of his build. Owen kept Theresa between them, one hand on his revolver as they navigated the dark alleys. Twice they froze at the sound of voices or footsteps, pressing into shadows until the danger passed. They had almost reached the livery when disaster struck. Rounding the final corner, they came face to face with a bearded man in a long coat, one of Blackburn's gang. For a moment, all four figures stood frozen in surprise. Then the man reached for his gun, opening his mouth to shout. Owen moved with the speed of long practice. Before the outlaw could draw or call out, Owen's fist connected with his jaw in a powerful right hook. The man staggered but didn't fall. Thomas stepped in, delivering a blow to the man's midsection that doubled him over. Together, they subdued the outlaw, Owen clamping a hand over his mouth to prevent him from calling for help. Thomas quickly produced a length of rope from his pocket. Always come prepared, he muttered as they bound and gagged the struggling man. The feed room, Owen directed in a whisper. We can't leave him out here to be found. They dragged their captive through the back door of the livery and into the feed room, a small storage area filled with sacks of grain and oats. The man's eyes bulged with fury above his gag as they secured him to a support post. He'll be found eventually, Thomas whispered, But not before morning, I'd wager. By then, it won't matter, Owen replied. He hasn't seen Theresa clearly in this light. Theresa had remained remarkably calm throughout the encounter, though Owen could see her hands trembling slightly. "Where will we hide?" she asked. "The hayloft," Thomas answered, leading them through the dim interior of the stable. "It's warm, relatively comfortable, and no one ever looks up." The hayloft occupied the upper portion of the livery, accessible by a wooden ladder. Thomas climbed first, then helped Theresa up. Owen followed, pulling the ladder up behind them to avoid leaving obvious signs of their presence. The loft was indeed warm, filled with sweet-smelling hay that would provide both bedding and concealment. A small window at the far end offered ventilation and a limited view of the street. "I'll bring food and water in the morning," Thomas whispered. "Try to get some rest. With luck, the marshal will be here by tomorrow night or the following morning." After Thomas departed, carefully replacing the ladder for his own exit, Owen and Theresa settled into the hay, creating small hollows for themselves. The night had turned cool, and Theresa pulled Emma's shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "Are you warm enough?" Owen asked, noticing the gesture. "Yes, thank you," she replied, though her slight shiver suggested otherwise. Without comment, Owen removed his coat and draped it over her. When she started to protest, he held up a hand. "I'm plenty warm," he insisted, "and I'm used to sleeping rough." Theresa accepted the coat with a grateful smile. "Thank you." They lay in silence for a while, listening to the occasional nickering of horses below and the distant sounds from the saloon down the street. Despite the relative comfort of the hay, sleep seemed distant for both of them. "What will you do?" Theresa asked suddenly, her voice soft in the darkness. "After the Blackburns are captured and I'm safely back with my sister." Owen hadn't thought that far ahead. "Go back to the cattle drive, I suppose," he said after a moment. "It's what I know." "But not what you want," Theresa observed perceptively. Owen smiled into the darkness. "No, not entirely, but a man can't always have what he wants." "What do you want, Owen Wade?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple words. Owen considered his answer carefully. "Land of my own," he said finally. "A small ranch, maybe a family someday if I'm lucky enough to find a woman who'd tolerate a weather-beaten cowhand with no prospects to speak of." "I think you underestimate yourself," Theresa said quietly, "and what a woman might see in you." Owen's heart quickened at her words. "What might she see, then?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. There was a rustle of hay as Theresa shifted to face him in the darkness. "A man of honor," she said. "A man who would risk his life for a stranger. Who sees a woman as a person, not a possession." She paused. "A man who might make someone very happy, given the chance." Owen reached out, finding her hand in the hay between them. Her fingers were cold, and he covered them with his own. "Theresa," he began, uncertain what he wanted to say but feeling the need to say something. "It's all right," she interrupted gently. "I know this isn't the time or place. We're running for our lives after all." Her fingers turned in his, squeezing lightly. "But when this is over, perhaps we could talk again." "I'd like that," Owen replied, relief and hope mingling in his chest. They fell asleep that way, hands joined between them in the sweet scented hay, the dangers surrounding them temporarily forgotten. Morning arrived with a shaft of sunlight through the loft window and the sounds of Thomas moving about the stable below. Owen woke first, carefully extricating his hand from Theresa's to move to the window and assess their situation. Main Street was busy with morning activity shopkeepers opening their businesses, a wagon delivering supplies to the general store, cowboys emerging bleary-eyed from the hotel after a night of drinking. And among them, obvious by their watchful postures and sidelong glances, were Blackburn's men. Owen counted at least 4, strategically positioned along the street. They were trying to be inconspicuous, but to his experienced eye, they might as well have been wearing signs announcing their intentions. Behind him, Theresa stirred. "What do you see?" she asked, her voice husky with sleep. "Trouble," Owen replied honestly. "Blackburn's got men watching the street." Theresa joined him at the window, careful to stay back from the opening. "Which ones?" Owen pointed out the men he'd identified. "They're looking for us, not finding us, that's something." "For now," Theresa agreed. "But they won't give up easily." The sound of the ladder being placed against the loft opening alerted them to Thomas's approach. He climbed up carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle and a canteen. "Breakfast," he announced in a low voice, "and news not all of it good." They sat in the hay while Thomas shared what he'd learned. The Blackburns had indeed searched the millinery shop that morning, frightening Emma but finding nothing suspicious. They'd also roused Sheriff Claiborne and demanded he organize a proper search of the entire town. "Claiborne's stalling," Thomas said, "claiming he needs to gather a proper posse, but he won't hold them off for long." "And the marshal?" Owen asked. "That's the better news. Danny got through to Cheyenne." "Word at the telegraph office is that Marshal Calloway has already departed with 6 deputies. They could arrive by nightfall." Relief flooded through Owen. "If we can just stay hidden until then." "That's the problem," Thomas said grimly. "They found Jenkins, the man you two helped me tie up last night. He told them he was jumped near the livery." Theresa's face paled. "So they'll search here again." "It's likely," Thomas confirmed. "I've been making a show of work all morning, trying to appear normal, but I don't know how long it'll hold them off." Owen's mind raced through their options, none of them good. "We could try to leave town," he suggested, "under cover of darkness." Thomas shook his head. "They've got the roads watched more closely than ever, and Blackburn's brought in more men overnight, at least 5 more that I've counted." "What about hiding elsewhere in town?" Theresa asked. "Somewhere unexpected. Most places have already been searched," Thomas replied. "And folks are scared no one wants to cross the Blackburns." Owen paced the small area of the loft, thinking. "What about outside town? Is there anywhere within walking distance we could reach without being seen?" Thomas considered this. "There's the old Miller place about 2 miles north. Been abandoned since old Frank died last winter. It's not much, but it would be shelter." "How would we get there unseen?" Theresa asked. "The creek runs behind the livery," Thomas explained. "Follows it north all the way to Miller's property. This time of year, the water's low enough to walk along the banks in most places. With the brush for cover, you might make it." It wasn't ideal, but it seemed their best option. "We'll leave at dusk," Owen decided. "Less chance of being spotted." Thomas nodded. "I'll bring supplies before then. And I'll try to keep anyone from searching the livery until you're gone." After Thomas departed, Owen and Theresa ate the breakfast he'd brought: hard-boiled eggs, bread, and dried apple slices. They spoke little, each lost in their own thoughts about the precarious situation. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Twice, they heard voices in the stable below, customers coming to collect or board horses. Each time, Thomas managed to conduct business without giving any indication of their presence overhead. Around mid-afternoon, a more worrying sound reached them: the loud, commanding voice of Cole Blackburn himself. "I know you're hiding something, Bennett," the outlaw leader said, his tone deceptively casual. "Jenkins was found right behind your stable, trussed up like a turkey." "Don't know anything about that," Thomas replied evenly. "Maybe your man has enemies besides Wade." "Maybe," Blackburn drawled. "Or maybe you're helping them. The woman was seen entering your sister's shop yesterday." Owen and Theresa exchanged alarmed glances. Someone had spotted her despite their caution. Lots of women go into a millinery shop, Thomas responded. My sister's got a good business. We searched the place. Nothing. Then I guess you were mistaken, Thomas said. There was a long pause, then the sound of a match being struck. The smell of cigar smoke wafted up to the loft. I'm not a patient man, Bennett, Blackburn said eventually, but I am thorough. Wade and that woman embarrassed me. No one does that and lives to tell about it. Sounds like a personal problem, Thomas replied, a dangerous edge to his voice. Now, if you don't mind, I've got horses to tend to. Heavy footsteps crossed the stable floor, then paused. I'll be back with the sheriff, Blackburn said, and next time we'll look everywhere, even places we've already searched. The door closed with a decisive thud. A moment later, Thomas's hushed voice called up to them. You heard, we heard, Owen confirmed grimly. You need to leave now, Thomas insisted. Don't wait for dusk. He means to come back soon. Owen knew he was right. We'll go. The creek route you mentioned, how do we find it? Out the back door, 50 yards straight behind the stable, Thomas directed. You'll see it, just follow it north. Stay in the brush along the banks. And the Miller place. Can't miss it, only house on that stretch of creek. White with a green roof, or what's left of it. Should take you about an hour at a good pace. Owen began gathering their few possessions while Theresa adjusted her clothing for the journey ahead. Thomas promised to bring supplies within the half hour, then return to his regular duties to avoid arousing suspicion. Are you ready for this? Owen asked Theresa quietly. She straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. I've been running from Cole Blackburn for days now. What's a few more hours? Her courage continued to amaze him. We'll make it, he promised. The marshal will be here by tonight and this will all be over. I hope you're right, Theresa replied. But I'm not counting on anyone but ourselves right now. Thomas returned 20 minutes later with a bundle of supplies, food, water, a small revolver for Theresa, and a worn but serviceable coat to replace the one Owen had given her. Coast is clear for now, Thomas reported, but don't dawdle. Use the feed room door, it opens directly to the back. They said their goodbyes quickly. Thomas embraced Theresa and shook Owen's hand firmly. Good luck, he said. I'll try to direct the marshal to the Miller place once he arrives. Owen and Theresa descended the ladder and moved quietly through the stable to the feed room. Their captive from the previous night was long gone, but the ropes that had bound him still lay on the floor, a reminder of the danger they faced. The feed room door opened with a slight creak, revealing the open area behind the stable. As Thomas had promised, they could see the creek about 50 yards distant, a ribbon of water lined with brush and small trees. Ready? Owen asked, scanning the surroundings for any sign of Blackburn's men. Theresa nodded, her expression determined. Ready. They moved quickly across the open ground, Owen leading the way with Theresa close behind. They reached the creek without incident and plunged into the protective cover of the brushy growth along its banks. The creek bed provided good concealment but challenging terrain. The banks were muddy in places, slippery with moss in others. Theresa's injured ankle troubled her on the uneven ground, but she pressed on without complaint, accepting Owen's steadying hand when necessary. They had traveled perhaps half a mile when they heard voices in the distance, men calling to one another, moving through the brush behind them. They've found our trail, Owen said grimly. We need to move faster. Theresa nodded, her face set with determination despite her obvious fatigue. They increased their pace, pushing through thickets and wading across shallow portions of the creek to obscure their tracks. The voices grew fainter as they continued north, following the meandering creek. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees overhead, dappling the ground with shifting patterns of light and shadow. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 40 minutes, They spotted a structure through the trees, the Miller place, just as Thomas had described it. A small, weathered farmhouse with a partially collapsed green roof, surrounded by overgrown fields. "There it is," Owen said, relief evident in his voice. "Let's get inside before they catch up." They crossed the final stretch of ground quickly, approaching the house from the rear. The back door hung loosely on rusted hinges, opening with a protesting groan when Owen pushed it. Inside, the house was dusty and abandoned but relatively intact. Simple furniture remained: a table, chairs, a bed frame with a rope mattress but no bedding. The windows were grimy but unbroken, and the stone fireplace appeared sound. "Not exactly luxurious," Owen commented, setting down their bundle of supplies, "but it'll do until the marshal arrives." Theresa sank gratefully onto one of the wooden chairs. "It's better than a creak bed," she observed, managing a tired smile. Owen checked the perimeter, ensuring all entrances were secure and identifying potential escape routes if needed. The house stood on a slight rise, offering a good view of the surrounding area, including the creek they had followed. "I don't see any sign of pursuit," he reported, returning to the main room where Theresa waited. "But they know we headed this way. It won't take them long to check the only building in the area." "How much longer until the marshal arrives?" Owen glanced at the angle of the sun through the window. "A few hours at least, possibly not until morning." Theresa nodded, accepting this information with remarkable calm. "Then we prepare as best we can." Together, they took stock of their situation. Thomas had provided them with enough food for a day, 2 canteens of water, Owen's rifle and revolver, and the small revolver for Theresa. The house itself offered limited defensive possibilities, but Owen moved furniture to create barricades near the doors and windows. As dusk approached, they ate a simple meal from their provisions. Theresa insisted on checking Owen's wounded arm, which had begun to throb again after their hasty journey along the creek. "It's healing," she pronounced, examining the injury with professional detachment. "But you've strained it today. It needs rest." Owen smiled wryly. "Rest is in short supply at the moment." "True," Theresa agreed, rebinding the wound with a clean strip of cloth from their supplies. "But you'll be no good to either of us if infection sets in." Her fingers moved deftly, her touch gentle yet firm. Owen found himself watching her face as she worked the slight furrow of concentration between her brows, the way she bit her lower lip slightly. "You'd have made a fine doctor," he said quietly. Theresa looked up, meeting his gaze. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of connection deeper than their shared danger. "Perhaps I still will," she replied. "If we survive this." "We will," Owen assured her, covering her hand with his own as she finished with the bandage. "I promise you that." The moment lingered, neither willing to break it. Then, from outside, came the sound that froze them both: hoofbeats approaching the house. Owen moved to the window, careful to stay hidden as he peered out. 3 riders were approaching from the direction of Valentine Blackburn's men without question. They rode with the casual confidence of men who believed their quarry cornered. "They've found us," Owen said, turning back to Theresa. 3 of them for now." Fear flickered across her face, but she squared her shoulders. "What do we do?" Owen considered their options. "We could try to run, but they'd spot us in the open. Better to make a stand here." He handed her the small revolver Thomas had provided. "Do you know how to use this?" Theresa accepted the weapon, checking it with surprising competence. "My father believed women should know how to protect themselves," she explained, seeing Owen's raised eyebrow. "He taught both Elizabeth and me." "Good," Owen said, genuinely impressed. "Stay away from the windows. If anyone gets in, don't hesitate to shoot." The riders had reached the house now. Owen heard them dismount, followed by the sound of boots on the porch. "Wade," a voice called rough, authoritative. "We know you're in there. Come out with the woman and maybe we'll let you live." Owen didn't respond. He positioned himself near the front window, rifle ready. "Last chance, Wade," the voice called again. "The boss wants the woman back unharmed, but he didn't say nothing about what condition you need to be in." When no response came, the men outside conferred briefly. Then a shot rang out, shattering one of the front windows. Glass sprayed across the floor as Theresa ducked behind the overturned table. "That's how you want to play it," the voice shouted. "Fine by me." More shots followed, peppering the front of the house. Owen waited patiently, tracking the movements of the men through the gaps in the shutters. When one exposed himself moving between cover, Owen took his shot. The crack of the rifle was followed by a cry of pain. "One down, at least temporarily. You'll pay for that," another voice shouted. "Burn them out, Joe." Owen's blood ran cold. Fire would leave them no option but to flee into the open, exactly what the outlaws wanted. He glanced at Theresa, who had understood the threat as well. She looked pale but resolute, the small revolver steady in her hands. "If they start a fire, we'll have to make a run for it," Owen said quietly. "Back toward the creek, then split up. You head north, I'll lead them south." "I'm not leaving you," Theresa replied firmly. "Theresa, no," she interrupted. "We stay together. Live or die, we face it together." Before Owen could argue further, a new sound reached them, multiple horses approaching at a gallop. Through the window, he saw a group of riders approaching from the south, at least 6 men, moving with purpose. For a moment, Owen feared Blackburn had brought reinforcements. Then he saw the glint of badges on their chests. U.S. Marshal, a commanding voice bellowed. "Drop your weapons." The scene outside dissolved into chaos. One of Blackburn's men tried to mount his horse and flee, only to be cut down by rifle fire. Another threw down his weapon and raised his hands. The third, already wounded by Owen's shot, made no move to resist. Owen watched as the marshal and his deputies quickly secured the outlaws. Only when the situation was clearly under control did he lower his rifle. "I think our rescue has arrived," he said to Theresa, relief evident in his voice. She moved to his side, looking out at the scene. "Thank God," she whispered. Owen opened the door cautiously, his rifle still ready. "Marshal Calloway," he called. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a gray-streaked beard turned toward the house. "That's me," he confirmed. "You must be Wade." Owen nodded. "This is Miss Theresa Mitchell. We're much obliged for your timely arrival." Marshal Calloway approached, holstering his revolver. "Got the message yesterday. Rode straight through." His keen eyes assessed them both. "You two all right? We're fine," Owen assured him. "But Cole Blackburn and his brothers are still in Valentine, along with several of their men." "Not anymore," Calloway replied with grim satisfaction. "We caught up with them at the edge of town. Seems they were heading this way in force." He gestured to one of his deputies. "Got Cole and Marcus in custody. Jed tried to shoot his way out. Didn't end well for him." Relief washed over Owen like a physical sensation. It was over. The Blackburns were captured or dead, and Theresa was finally safe. "There are 3 more gang members unaccounted for," Calloway continued. "But without the Blackburns to lead them, they'll likely scatter." "What happens now?" Theresa asked, her voice steady despite her obvious exhaustion. "Now, madam, we get you both back to Valentine," Calloway replied. "There's a doctor there can check you over, and we'll need statements from both of you for the record." As the marshal spoke with his deputies, Owen turned to Theresa. In the fading light, her face showed the strain of the past days, but there was something else there too, a quiet triumph, a resilience that moved him deeply. "It's really over," she said, as if hardly daring to believe it. Owen nodded. You're safe now. No one's coming for you ever again." Tears welled in Theresa's eyes, the first he'd seen from her despite everything she'd endured. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding me, for staying with me." Impulsively, Owen reached out, drawing her into his arms. She came willingly, her head resting against his chest as she finally allowed herself to release the fear and tension she'd been holding at bay. "You're the bravest person I've ever met," Owen said softly, his cheek against her hair. "And the strongest." Theresa looked up at him, her face tear-streaked but beautiful in the golden light of sunset. "What happens now? For us, I mean." Owen hadn't planned beyond keeping her safe, but looking into her eyes, he knew what he wanted. "That's up to you," he said. "But I'd like to find out if what's between us is real or just born of danger." A smile bloomed on Theresa's face, transforming it despite the dirt and exhaustion. "I already know it's real," she said. "At least for me." "For me too," Owen admitted, "but maybe we could start properly. I could call on you in Cheyenne when you're settled back with your family." "I'd like that," Theresa replied. "Very much." Marshal Calloway approached, interrupting their moment. "Sorry to break this up, but we should get moving before dark. Got horses for both of you." They rode back to Valentine in the company of the marshal and his deputies. The journey that had taken them an anxious hour on foot was covered quickly on horseback. Night was falling as they entered the town, which seemed transformed by the news of the Blackburn's capture. People lined the streets, watching as the prisoners were escorted to the jail. Many called out thanks to the marshal, while others simply stood in silent relief that the threat had finally ended. Thomas and Emma were waiting at the livery, their faces lighting with joy at the sight of Owen and Theresa safe with the lawmen. There were tearful embraces and heartfelt thanks as they reunited. "I knew you'd make it," Emma said, hugging Theresa tightly. "I just knew it." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Owen and Theresa gave their statements to the marshal, detailing their encounters with the Blackburn gang. The town doctor examined them both, pronouncing Theresa exhausted but otherwise healthy, and redressing Owen's arm wound properly. Emma insisted they stay at her apartment that night. "You both need proper rest in proper beds," she declared in a tone that brooked no argument. After a hot meal and even hotter baths, luxuries that seemed almost unimaginable after their ordeal, Owen and Theresa found themselves alone in Emma's small parlor. Thomas had returned to the livery, and Emma had retired for the night. "Marshal Calloway says he can arrange an escort to take you back to Cheyenne tomorrow," Owen said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Your sister must be worried sick." Theresa nodded, though a shadow crossed her face. "I'm not sure I'm ready," she admitted. "To face everyone, I mean. To answer all the questions about what happened to me." "You don't have to tell anyone anything you don't want to," Owen reminded her. "What happened is your story to tell or keep private as you choose." "Will you come with me?" Theresa asked suddenly. "To Cheyenne, I mean, just to help me get settled again." The request surprised Owen, though perhaps it shouldn't have. After everything they'd been through together, the thought of separating now seemed wrong somehow. "If you want me to, yes," he replied. "I'd be honored." Relief softened Theresa's features. "Thank you." "What will you do after?" Owen asked. "Will you stay in Cheyenne with your sister?" Theresa considered the question. "I don't think so," she said finally. "Not permanently, at least. I need to make my own way now. Your medical studies," a determined light entered her eyes. "Yes. There's a women's medical college in Philadelphia that accepts qualified female students. I've thought about it for years but never had the courage to pursue it. And now I know I can face anything," Theresa said with quiet confidence. "Including the disapproval of people who think women shouldn't be doctors." Owen smiled, pride welling in his chest. "You'll make a fine physician, Dr. Mitchell." "That's a long way off," she replied, though she returned his smile. "What about you? Back to the cattle drives?" Owen shook his head slowly. "No, I don't think so. I've been saving for years. Not enough for a proper ranch yet, but maybe a homestead claim, something to build on." "Where would you settle?" Theresa asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I've always liked Wyoming," Owen replied, watching her face. "Good grazing land. Not too crowded yet. Close enough to Cheyenne for supplies, but far enough for peace and quiet. And close enough to receive letters from Philadelphia?" Theresa asked, a hint of vulnerability in her question. Owen reached across the small space between them, taking her hand in his. "Close enough for that," he agreed, "and close enough to welcome a visiting medical student during her holidays." Hope bloomed in Theresa's eyes. "You'd wait while I studied?" "For you," Owen said softly. "Yes. If that's what you want." Theresa's fingers tightened around his. "It's not what I planned," she admitted, "meeting someone like you, feeling this way in the middle of everything else." "Life rarely goes according to plan," Owen observed. "Especially out here." "No," Theresa agreed. "But sometimes what we find instead is better than what we planned." She leaned forward, her free hand coming up to touch his cheek. Owen remained still, letting her set the pace of this new territory between them. "I've never been a forward woman," Theresa whispered, "but I think I've earned the right to know my own mind." "You have," Owen agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "And my mind, my heart says I don't want to lose you, Owen Wade." "You won't," he promised. "However this works out between us, you won't lose me." Theresa smiled, then closed the distance between them. Her lips met his in a kiss that was tentative at first, then grew in confidence. Owen returned it gently, his hand coming up to cradle the back of her head. When they parted, both a little breathless, Theresa's eyes were bright with emotion. "That was worth waiting for," she said softly. Owen smiled, his heart fuller than he could remember it being in years. "Yes," he agreed. "It was." The journey to Cheyenne the next day was uneventful, with Marshal Calloway himself accompanying them as an escort. Theresa grew quieter as they approached the town, anxiety evident in the set of her shoulders. "It will be all right," Owen assured her as the buildings of Cheyenne came into view. "Your sister will just be happy you're safe." "I know," Theresa replied, though she didn't look entirely convinced. "It's just, I'm not the same person who left on that stagecoach 3 weeks ago." "No," Owen agreed. "You're stronger, braver." She gave him a grateful look. "Thank you for seeing me that way." Elizabeth Mitchell Parker's reunion with her sister was everything Owen could have hoped for. There were tears, embraces, and a profound relief that required no words. Elizabeth's husband George, a serious man with kind eyes, welcomed Theresa home with quiet joy, while young James clung to his aunt's skirts, confused by the emotions of the adults but happy to see her nonetheless. Owen stood back, watching the family reunion with a mixture of happiness for Theresa and a strange sense of loss. This was her world, her family. What place could a wandering cowboy have in it? But Elizabeth, after the initial flood of emotion had subsided, turned to Owen with gratitude shining in her eyes so like Theresa's. "Mr. Wade," she said, taking his hands in hers, "my sister has told us everything you did for her. We can never repay you." Owen shook his head, embarrassed by her thanks. "Anyone would have done the same, madam." "No," Elizabeth said firmly. "They wouldn't have. And I thank God you were the one who found her." Over the next few days, Owen was surprised to find himself welcomed into the Parker household as an honored guest. George, despite his initial reserve, proved to be a thoughtful conversationalist with a dry wit that emerged once he was comfortable. James took to Owen immediately, fascinated by his stories of cattle drives and life on the trail. And Theresa. Theresa seemed to bloom as she settled back into family life, though Owen noticed she avoided going into town or meeting with acquaintances. The shadows of her ordeal hadn't entirely left her, but her resilience continued to amaze him. They found moments alone together, chaperoned walks in the garden, quiet conversations after James was in bed. During these times, they spoke of their hopes and dreams, learning each other in the peaceful aftermath of danger. A week after their arrival in Cheyenne, Theresa broached the subject of Philadelphia and her medical ambitions to her family. Elizabeth was supportive, though concerned about her sister being so far away. George was surprisingly enthusiastic, offering to help with the financial arrangements. "You've always wanted this," Elizabeth said, embracing her sister. "Father would be so proud." That evening, Owen and Theresa walked in the garden behind the Parker house, the summer twilight lingering around them. "So, Philadelphia," Owen said, breaking a comfortable silence. "When would you go?" "The fall term begins in September," Theresa replied. "Just over 2 months from now." Owen nodded, trying to ignore the tightness in his chest at the thought of her leaving. "That's good, gives you time to prepare." Theresa stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "Owen, I meant what I said in Valentine. I don't want to lose you." "You won't," he assured her. "Philadelphia isn't the end of the world." "It might as well be," she said, frustration edging her voice. "It's a 4-day journey by train. Letters take weeks. We'd be separated for months at a time." Owen took her hands in his expression serious. "Theresa, I would never ask you to give up your dream. Not for me, not for anyone. You fought too hard for it." "I know," she replied, her eyes searching his face. "And I wouldn't ask you to give up yours either. Your land, your ranch." "Then we find a way to have both," Owen said simply. "It won't be easy and it won't be quick. But if what we feel for each other is real, and I believe it is, then it's worth the wait." Theresa's expression softened. "You'd wait for me, through 4 years of medical school." "I'd wait a lifetime if that's what it took," Owen replied honestly. "But I'm hoping it won't come to that." A smile curved Theresa's lips. "What are you suggesting, Mr. Wade?" "Nothing improper, Miss Mitchell," he assured her with an answering smile. "Just that perhaps, if you were willing, we might consider a formal understanding before you leave for Philadelphia." "An understanding," Theresa repeated, her eyes brightening. "As in a betrothal," Owen nodded, suddenly nervous. "It's soon, I know. Too soon, perhaps. But I know my own heart, Theresa. I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you." Theresa stepped closer, her hand still held in his. "It is soon," she agreed. "Under normal circumstances, I'd say we were rushing, but nothing about our meeting has been normal, has it?" "Not exactly traditional," Owen conceded. "And yet," Theresa continued, "I know you better after 2 weeks of danger than I might know someone after months of proper courtship. I've seen your character tested in ways most never experience." Hope rose in Owen's chest. "Is that a yes?" "It's a I need to think about it," Theresa replied honestly. "Not because I doubt my feelings, but because this affects all our plans. Mine for medical school, yours for your ranch." "Of course," Owen said quickly. "Take all the time you need." Theresa smiled, standing on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. "Not too much time," she promised. "Just enough to be sure we're doing this right." The next morning, Owen met with George Parker in his study. The banker listened attentively as Owen outlined his situation, his savings, his plans for a homestead, his feelings for Theresa. "You're asking for my blessing," George observed when Owen finished, "since her father is no longer with us." "Yes, sir," Owen confirmed. "I know it's soon," but George held up a hand, stopping him. "Mr. Wade, I've spent my life assessing men's character. It's part of being a banker, and while I haven't known you long, I've seen enough to form an opinion." Owen waited, tension knotting his stomach. "You saved my sister-in-law's life," George continued. "You treated her with respect when many wouldn't have. And most importantly, you support her ambitions instead of asking her to abandon them." He leaned forward. "Those things speak more to your character than any bank balance or business prospects." Relief flooded through Owen. "Thank you, sir." "That said," George added, his expression turning shrewd, "a man needs a solid foundation to support a family. How much land were you thinking of claiming?" The conversation turned to practical matters: the Homestead Act, available land near Cheyenne, costs of establishing a small ranch. By the end, George had offered to help Owen secure a better parcel than he might have managed alone, using his banking connections. "Consider it an investment in my sister-in-law's happiness," George said when Owen tried to protest. "And perhaps a wedding gift if it comes to that." That evening, Owen and Theresa walked again in the garden, this time with the blessing of her family to speak privately. "I've been thinking about your proposal," Theresa began, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of emotion. "And?" Owen prompted when she didn't immediately continue. Theresa took a deep breath. "And I've realized something. When I was captive with the Blackburns, I promised myself that if I survived, I would never again let fear make my decisions for me." She turned to face him fully, moonlight silvering her features. "Saying no to you because our situation is complicated would be letting fear decide. And I won't do that." Owen's heart quickened. "What are you saying, Theresa?" "I'm saying yes," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "Yes, I will marry you, Owen Wade. Not immediately, I still want to pursue my medical studies, but with the understanding that our futures are joined, however unconventional our path might be." Joy unlike anything Owen had ever known surged through him. He gathered Theresa in his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. Her laughter, bright and unburdened, was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. "I love you," he said as he set her down, the words coming easily now. "I think I have since I found you behind that barn." "And I love you," Theresa replied, her hands framing his face. "My unlikely hero." The next 2 months passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Owen, with George's help, secured a promising homestead claim about 15 miles outside Cheyenne, 160 acres of good grazing land, with a creek running through it and enough timber for building. He began work on a small cabin, aided by Thomas, who had come from Valentine to help his friend establish his new home. Theresa divided her time between helping Owen with his preparations and making her own for Philadelphia. She secured her place at the Women's Medical College, arranged for lodging, and studied medical texts borrowed from the local doctor to prepare herself. Their betrothal was announced formally 3 weeks after Owen's proposal, with a small celebration at the Parker home. Elizabeth, initially concerned about the unusual arrangement, had come to see the depth of feeling between her sister and Owen, and gave her blessing wholeheartedly. "Just promise you'll both write regularly," she insisted. "I want to know everything about Philadelphia and this ranch of yours." As September approached, a bittersweet mood settled over the couple. The reality of their impending separation loomed larger, tempering their happiness with practical concerns. 4 years is a long time, Owen observed one evening as they sat on the porch of his half-finished cabin, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "It is," Theresa agreed, "but we'll have holidays and letters. And a wedding to plan," Owen added. "For when you've finished your first year, perhaps." They had decided on a compromise. Theresa would complete her first year of medical studies, then return to Wyoming for the summer. They would marry then, and she would continue her education as Mrs. Wade rather than Miss Mitchell. "It's a good plan," Theresa said. leaning her head against his shoulder. "Unconventional, but good. Like us," Owen replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. The day of Theresa's departure arrived too quickly. The train station in Cheyenne bustled with activity as Owen, Elizabeth, George, and young James prepared to see her off. Theresa stood amid her luggage, outwardly composed but with a shimmer of tears in her eyes. "This isn't goodbye," Owen reminded her as they stood a little apart from the others. "It's just until next time," Theresa nodded, gripping his hands tightly. "The first holiday is Christmas, just 4 months. I'll be counting the days," Owen promised. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "I wanted to give you this before you left. Something to remember me by." Theresa opened the box to find a simple gold ring with a small pearl. "Owen, it's beautiful," she breathed. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing I have left of hers. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for the right person to give it to." Tears spilled onto Theresa's cheeks as she slipped the ring onto her finger. "I'll cherish it," she promised, "and I'll never take it off." The train whistle blew, announcing the final boarding call. Owen pulled Theresa close for one last embrace, memorizing the feel of her in his arms, the scent of her hair. "I love you," he whispered. "Study hard, but come back to me." "I will," she promised, "on both counts." Their final kiss was gentle yet filled with promise, not an ending, but a pause in a story still unfolding. Then Theresa was boarding the train, waving from the window as it pulled away from the station, carrying her east toward her dreams. Owen watched until the train disappeared from sight, a mixture of pride and longing in his heart. Then he turned to the Parker family, who would be his family too in time. "She'll be fine," Elizabeth said, slipping her arm through his. "She's stronger than any of us knew." "Yes," Owen agreed. "She is." The months passed, marked by letters exchanged and milestones reached. Theresa wrote of her studies, the challenges and triumphs of medical school, and her growing confidence in her chosen path. Owen described the progress on his ranch, the cabin completed, the first small herd of cattle acquired, the vegetable garden planted in anticipation of her Christmas visit. True to her word, Theresa returned to Wyoming for Christmas. The reunion at the train station was joyous, with Owen lifting her off her feet the moment she stepped onto the platform. She looked different, more confident, more polished, but her smile when she saw him was exactly the same. "Welcome home," Owen said as he set her down. Theresa's eyes shone. "It feels like home," she agreed. "Because you're here." The 2 weeks of her holiday passed too quickly, filled with family gatherings at the Parkers, quiet evenings in Owen's completed cabin, and plans for their summer wedding. When she departed again in January, the separation was easier, tempered by the knowledge that each day brought them closer to their permanent reunion. Spring arrived in Wyoming, bringing new life to Owen's ranch. He added to his herd, built a proper barn, and prepared for the summer and all it would bring. Theresa's letters spoke of her successful completion of her first year's studies and her excitement about returning. In June, she came home to stay at least for the summer. Their wedding was simple but joyful, held on Owen's ranch with a small gathering of family and friends. Thomas and Emma made the journey from Valentine, bringing news that their town had prospered since the Blackburn threat ended. Theresa wore a dress of ivory silk that Elizabeth had helped her select, with wildflowers in her hair. Owen, in a new suit that felt strange after years of worn denim, thought she had never looked more beautiful. "I take you, Theresa Mitchell, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice steady despite the emotion tightening his throat. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Theresa's eyes shimmered with tears as she repeated the vows, her hands warm in his. The simple gold band he placed on her finger alongside her pearl ring symbolized a promise fulfilled, one made in danger but realized in peace. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Their kiss sealed a journey that had begun behind an abandoned barn, with a terrified woman and a wounded cowboy who had promised her safety when he had little reason to believe it himself. The summer months were a blissful interlude, a honeymoon period in the truest sense. Theresa proved to be as adept at ranch life as she was at medical studies, establishing their home with efficiency and warmth. Owen's small herd prospered under his care, and the first year's crops promised a good harvest. But September approached again, bringing with it the reality they had both acknowledged from the beginning. Theresa's education wasn't complete. 3 years of medical school still awaited her. "I'll understand if you've changed your mind," Owen said one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the familiar Wyoming sunset. "If you want to stay." Theresa turned to him, her expression serious. "Do you want me to stay, to give up medical school?" "No," Owen replied honestly. "I want you to follow your dream. I always have." Theresa smiled, leaning in to kiss him softly. "That's one of the reasons I love you so much," she said, "and why I know we'll make this work." The separation was harder this time, harder to leave the home they had made together, the life they had begun to build. But they were sustained by their love and their shared vision of the future. Over the next 3 years, they established a rhythm to their unconventional marriage. Theresa returned for every holiday and the entire summer break. Owen traveled to Philadelphia once each year, marveling at the bustling city and proudly watching Theresa in her element among her medical books and fellow students. Their letters sustained them during the separation's pages, filled with daily details, hopes, dreams, and unwavering love. Owen expanded the ranch, adding to his herd and his holdings. Theresa excelled in her studies, earning the respect of professors who had initially been skeptical of a married woman's commitment to medicine. And finally, in the spring of 1883, 5 years after their first meeting behind that barn in Valentine, Theresa completed her medical education. Owen traveled to Philadelphia for her graduation, bursting with pride as she received her medical degree. "Dr. Wade," he said afterward as they celebrated with her classmates and professors. "It has a fine ring to it." Theresa's smile was radiant, almost as good as Mrs. Wade, she replied, squeezing his hand. But not quite. Their return to Wyoming was triumphant. The ranch had prospered under Owen's management, growing from a humble homestead to a respectable operation with a comfortable home, good outbuildings, and a herd of over 100 cattle. The original cabin had been expanded into a proper house, with a special room that Owen had added as a surprise, a doctor's office for his wife. "The nearest doctor is in Cheyenne," he explained as he showed her the room, equipped with basic medical supplies and a small examination table. "The ranchers and homesteaders around here could use someone closer." Tears filled Theresa's eyes as she surveyed the space. "You thought of everything," she whispered. "I had 5 years to plan," Owen replied with a smile. Dr. Theresa Wade established her medical practice slowly but steadily. Word spread among the neighboring ranches and farms that a competent doctor was available closer than town. She treated everything from minor injuries to childbirths, earning respect for her skills and compassion. Owen's ranch continued to thrive, allowing them a comfortable life and the freedom for Theresa to treat patients who couldn't always pay. They became known throughout the region for their generosity, and their unusual story, the cowboy and the doctor, who had found each other in the most desperate of circumstances. A year after Theresa's return, their family grew with the birth of their first child, a son they named James Thomas Wade, after her nephew and their friend from Valentine. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Elizabeth Emma Wade, honoring both Theresa's sister and the woman who had sheltered them in their time of need. On the 10th anniversary of their first meeting, Owen took Theresa on a special journey back to Valentine, Wyoming. The town had grown and prospered in the decade since the Blackburn gang's reign of terror had ended. Thomas still ran the livery, though with the help of his nephew now, and Emma's millinery had expanded to include a dressmaking shop. They visited the old barn where Owen had first found Theresa cowering in fear. It was still standing, though now part of a proper ranch rather than abandoned on the outskirts of town. "It's strange to see it again," Theresa said, standing beside her husband as they looked at the weathered structure. "To think of who I was then and what lay ahead." Owen put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. "If I could go back and tell that frightened woman what her future held, I wonder if she'd believe it." Theresa smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Probably not. A medical practice, a ranch, 2 beautiful children, and a husband who supported it all." She shook her head. "It would have seemed impossible." "Not impossible," Owen corrected gently. "Just unlikely, like finding each other in the first place." They stood together in the golden light of late afternoon, the same light that had illuminated their first meeting a decade earlier. So much had changed, yet the essential truth remained the same. In a land where danger and opportunity walked hand in hand, they had found in each other not just safety but the courage to pursue their dreams. "You're safe here," Owen had promised that day behind the barn. "No one's coming." He couldn't have known then how true those words would prove to be, not just in that moment of immediate danger, but in the life they would build together. A life where safety meant the freedom to grow, to dream, to become their best selves side by side. And as they turned away from the barn to return to their waiting children, to the future, they continued to shape together. Both knew with absolute certainty that the unlikely promise made that day had been kept, and would be kept for all the days to come.